If you're thinking about buying a home on Maui and you keep hearing people talk about Wailuku and Kahului like they're the same place, well, they're not. These two towns sit right next to each other, but they come from completely different origins, sit on completely different terrain, and live completely differently today. Picking the wrong one isn't the end of the world, but it can mean a longer commute, a different climate on your own street, or a neighborhood that just doesn't fit how you actually want to live. I've helped buyers land in both towns, and today I'm breaking down the full picture from the Hawaiian era all the way down to today's real estate market, so you can figure out which one is actually the right fit. Before I get into it, if you're looking to buy on Maui and you want someone who actually lives here and works these neighborhoods every single day, my contact info is in the description below. Reach out anytime. Now let's get into it. The land before any of this was built. So long before either town existed the way we know them today, this part of central Maui was one of the most important places on the entire island. Wailuku sat at the base of Mauna Kahalavai, the West Maui Mountains, right where Iao Valley opens up. That valley was sacred ground. It was the political seat for some of Maui's most powerful rulers, including King Pi'ilani and later Kahekili, considered one of the most formidable chiefs in Hawaiian history. This was the center of power for the island. In 1790, Iao Valley became the site of the Battle of Kepaniwai, one of the most significant battles in Hawaiian history. Kamehameha I brought a massive force to Maui and defeated the Maui army in that valley, a decisive step in his campaign to unite the Hawaiian Islands under one rule. The name Wailuku itself is tied to that history. It's often translated as water of destruction. Kahului's story before Western contact was different. It didn't carry the same role as a seat of political power, but the natural bay along that stretch of coast made it a logical spot for canoe landings and later, once foreign ships started arriving, a natural harbor. The flat land stretching inland from that bay is what we now call the Central Valley, and it would end up shaping everything that came after. In the early to mid 1800s, Christian missionaries settled in Wailuku, drawn in part by its existing population and its role as a hub. You can still see that era today in places like the Bailey House, built in 1833, and Ka'ahumanu Church, which has stood for well over a century. Wailuku grew as a town organically, layered on top of centuries of Hawaiian settlement. Kahului's transformation came from a different direction entirely: sugar. As the sugar industry expanded across central Maui in the late 1800s, companies needed a reliable way to move raw sugar off the island. The flat land and coastal bay made Kahului the obvious choice. A deep water harbor was built, along with Hawaii's first railroad, connecting the mills to the port. Almost overnight, Kahului became the industrial engine of the island, built entirely around function rather than settlement. That early industrial town actually burned down around 1900 during an effort to stop a plague outbreak, wiping out most of what existed at that time. Here's where Kahului's story gets really interesting for anyone buying real estate there today, and it actually starts 100 years earlier than you'd expect. Back in 1843, two kids named Samuel Alexander and Henry Baldwin, both sons of missionaries, met in Lahaina. They grew up together and eventually built the sugar partnership that became Alexander and Baldwin, one of the most influential companies in Hawaii's history. Now fast forward to 1949, and that same company formed the Kahului Development Company, specifically to build a new kind of town. The timing lined up with the plantation's plan to shut down a number of its worker camps. Instead of just closing them and leaving families scrambling, the company decided to build a real town where those workers could actually own their homes. That town became known as Dream City, and it went up in the area we now call Kahului. Planning took about 2 years and was handled by an outside firm out of St. Louis. The goal wasn't just housing, it was bringing together roughly 25 separate plantation camps, many of which had been informally segregated by ethnicity into one unified modern community. By the time it was fully built out, more than 3,500 homes had been sold, released in phases over the following couple decades. The homes themselves were considered impressively modern for the era. Concrete and hollow tile construction, 17 different floor plan options, each around 1,090 square feet with 3 bedrooms and a garage. Pricing generally ran in the $6,000 to $9,000 range, with a few $100s down and monthly payments around $50, which was considered remarkably accessible at the time. The plan also set aside space for a business district, schools, churches, and recreation areas. And in 1951, the Kahului Shopping Center opened as one of the very first shopping centers in the state. The federal government actually took notice too. The head of the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, at the time called Kahului's new housing among the best low-cost housing he'd seen anywhere in the country. The first family moved in during the summer of 1950, and demand ended up far outpacing what planners expected. That's a big part of why Kahului feels the way it does today. It wasn't a town that grew organically over centuries like Wailuku. It was deliberately designed, block by block, to give plantation families a shot at home ownership. And that DNA still shows up in the layout of the streets and neighborhoods you'll drive through now. This is something buyers rarely ask about upfront, but it makes a real difference in daily life. Wailuku sits right up against Mauna Kehalani, the West Maui Mountains. And because it's tucked along those slopes, it tends to run noticeably cooler than areas out in the open valley. And it catches more cloud cover and rain coming off the mountains. If you ever driven through Wailuku on a day where Kahului is sunny and hot, you already know what I'm talking about. Kahului, on the other hand, sits out in the flat central valley between the West Maui Mountains and Haleakala. Because it's flatter and more exposed, it tends to run warmer and drier. Kahului is also positioned a bit closer to the upcountry route and the Kihei route, so if you're regularly heading towards Pukalani, Makawao, Kula, or Kihei, that drive tends to feel a little more direct from Kahului than it does from Wailuku. Now, neither climate is right or wrong, but if you're someone who prefers cooler, greener surroundings, Wailuku's position on the slopes is worth paying attention to. If you prefer more sun and a flatter, more open feel, Kahului delivers that. Now let's talk money. Wailuku has a mix of older plantation-era homes, newer construction near the edges of town, and a good number of condos closer to downtown. Kahului is more centrally planned overall, with a large share of homes built during and after the Dream City era, plus newer subdivisions layered in over the decades since. Because Wailuku's housing stock spans such a wide range of eras, you'll typically find a broader spread of price points there. Kahului tends to be a bit more consistent because so much of it grew out of the same planning process. I always tell buyers to look at price per square foot instead of just the sticker price, because that number tells you a lot more about what you're actually getting for your money. If you're comparing these two towns, you can't skip over Maui Lani and Kehalani, because they sit right in the seam between them and they've become some of the most popular places to buy on the island. Maui Lani sits in central Maui and was developed around a golf course, the dunes at Maui Lani. It's built out across roughly 1,000 acres, with the first subdivision starting construction in the mid-1990s and the latest one still under construction today. It includes several distinct neighborhoods, some gated, along with its own shopping center and medical facilities. It's designed for people who want a quiet, family-friendly setting while staying minutes from the airport, hospital, and business district. Now, Kehalani sits right at the border of Wailuku and Kahului, nestled at the base of the West Maui Mountains. It's a master planned community of around 2,400 to 2,800 homes across roughly 550 acres, with a mix of single-family homes, townhomes, and condos. Because of where it sits geographically, Kehalani tends to pick up some of that cooler, slope-side climate that Wailuku is known for, while still giving you quick access to Kahalui's amenities. Now, both communities are excellent options if you want a more modern, planned neighborhood feel rather than an older property. And both come up constantly in buyer searches once people start comparing these two towns. Kahului is the commercial center of the island today. The airport, the harbor, most big box stores, and a large share of the island's jobs are based here. If you work in Kahului or fly frequently, living here cuts your commute down to almost nothing. And as I mentioned, it also sits a bit closer to the upcountry corridor or to Kihei. Wailuku is the county seat, so government offices are concentrated here along with the historic downtown area. If you work in Wailuku or you want a slightly quieter, cooler setting while still being close to everything Kahului has to offer, it's worth serious consideration. The actual drive between the two towns is basically nothing, often under 10 minutes, so for a lot of buyers, this comes down to the lifestyle preference rather than necessity. Both towns are served by public schools in the Central Maui Complex area, and both share access to Maui Memorial Medical Center, which sits right on the border between them. Everyday amenities, groceries, gyms, shopping are plentiful in both, with Kahului having a slight edge simply because of its larger commercial footprint. Final recap. So here's the short version. Wailuku carries centuries of Hawaiian history, sits cooler and greener against the mountains, and has that older, textured downtown feel. Kahului was deliberately built as a planned town after the plantation era, sits flatter and warmer out in the Central Valley, and gives you the most convenience and shortest drive to the airport, upcountry, and Kihei. Maui Lani and Kehalani both give you a modern, planned alternative if neither an older Wailuku home nor a classic Kahului subdivision is quite what you're looking for. If you're trying to figure out which of these towns actually fits your life, I'd rather just talk it through with you directly than you have to guess. Reach out using the info in the description and I can walk you through current listings across Wailuku, Kahului, Maui Lani, and Kehalani based on what you're actually looking for. And if you want to see what a real home in one of these areas look like, check out the video linked right here where I took a tour of our latest listing in Waikapu.